High-grade Universal Century Messala. Hey, what's up again, everybody? It's Robert184, 2Rs2Bs, gundamreviews.net, and you might think I'm confused right here, but you've already seen the MS mode here for this Messala, but it showed up in the anime first as an MA, and so now it's time to take a look at that in this particular model form. But before looking at the actual transformation itself, I think we've got to talk about the fact that it can do that. Because if you go back to First Gundam and you talk about the original, 18 MSs that we got to see in the show, we got to see them all and none of them transformed. We had underwater ones, space ones, and different things like that. But when they decided to do Gundam the Next Generation, or the equivalent, once they pulled out Zeta, of course the MS design, the mecha design for the Zeta Gundam itself, was key, and they had it in mind from the very beginning that the lead Gundam, the main title one, was actually going to be transforming. And it's sort of something that's somewhat interesting because after Zeta, they definitely could have gone in the direction of many shows. Super Sentai added aspects over the first few seasons that, well, what has become considered to be Super Sentai that are now mainstays, and Gundam could have gone in the same way. We got to see it with the Double Zeta, and we still see it used occasionally in things like the Age 2, and in between with the V1 and V2 and things like that. But they decided to make the lead Gundam transform, and after that, it didn't quite stick. But it is the kind of thing that it's stuck in an aspect of, well, you're always going to be having especially bad guys out there, big, bulky, angry guys that are going to be MSs, and they can go MAs, and the Messala is going to be very significant from Paptimus' first appearance in, what was it, episode 9 or 10 of Zeta Gundam. When he showed up, we got to see the massive speed, and he could avoid Char and the Hyakushiki, and we got to see him take on the Mark II, and just seeing him transform eventually was a neat taste of things to come before we actually got to see Camille hop in the much more traditional Zeta Gundam after the nice transition, because they just went from the RX, the original 78 Gundam, to the 178 one here. So they kept it familiar at the beginning, and then they went in a new direction. It's just sort of interesting that it didn't stick. But I, for one, am just happy to be bringing this home in a non-1/220th ridiculous scale and seeing how the transformation is actually going to work. So let's get to it. But please don't forget to add your comments below talking about transforming MSMAs, what you think of them, especially when they come into Gunpla, because we all know that it's going to have an effect on the Gunpla design. So let's see it here. To kick things off here, you'll want to actually detach the manipulators and take the whole shoulder units off, as these are going to get the shoulder blades, if you will, replaced. And then you're going to take this front part here, which is sort of cool, and it just drops down. That happened a couple times during my MS review, and drop back into place. Pretty solid, although it can slide nice and easily when you need it to. And now for the side view here, where you're going to go and put this part to use as you bring this whole thing up. And when you do that, you're going to notice that this comes up here, as this whole thing is just going to sort of drop forward. You bring this up here, and then you're going to notice that this part can sort of butt forward there and bang into the back of the head. And then the shoulder parts here are just going to be dropped off if you didn't do it earlier. And people who don't like swapping parts off may not like this part. For me, it's going to be mitigated by the fact that the base is going to be holding these. Albeit ugly, it's still going to be holding it pretty well. As you take that shoulder part there, and you're going to plug this in first into the main body, and then you can see that it's going to line up very, very nicely there. Something to be aware of is when you're putting these down is to make sure that you get these gray parts at the angle that's specified in the manual. And I have to interrupt here to be reminded of Starscream shooting off his foot. Well, he could actually lock himself in place if he was Paptimus in the Messala. For the lower body now, you're going to take these gray parts and fold them in for the toes and the heels as well. Those are going to be all locked into place. Do that on both sides. You can get these veins in or out of the way as needed. And then it's time to actually go and take the whole thing and spin it around there, which is going to be leading to something that's going to be looking a little bit awkward. And then you can open them back up if you want. Is that looking cool so far? Then for the arms, you'll detach this part down here and then just go and slide it into the top. You can see that it's got a couple of pegs there, so ideally that would lock into place. And if you get it at just the right angle, this time you want it to cooperate. So it's just a matter of making sure that you get the shoulder and elbow lined up appropriately. With the final trick being, if you notice here, it's a little bit hollow on the inside, and that's going to come into play as you go and plug the arm back in down there, and then you actually attach it onto that same gray piece that's holding the booster on. They've done a good job of being economical in terms of their attachment points. And with the camera pretty much in line with it here, what do you think of this mobile armor all the way back from the mid-1980s? For me, first of all, in terms of looks, I'm going to say it looks pretty cool in terms of all the color apps being in the right places. You'll notice, especially if you can see it from above, that it's going to have the yellow seals there, even that awkward one on the head, and you are still going to be seeing the red parts down there on the ankles, forearms, and that base is going to be problematic. But back to the positives, overall, I think the thrusters are going to be looking good, especially these little wingtips here. Yes, they fall off all the time, but the blasters look good in this nose cone here, which totally gets lost in the shuffle. When he's in his MS mode there, the angry spikes and the pink eyes are going to be looking pretty cool. And I know that there's definitely some people out there, especially Transformer fans, where if you see the head of the robot when it's actually in its transform mode is definitely a no-no. But for this one, for whatever reason, it actually comes across as looking pretty cool. Cockpit-ish, if you will. The mono eye, of course, is going to be standing out. But the interesting design doesn't seem to scream humanoid head the way that most Gundams do. So for me, this one is going to get a pass in most ways, except for the fact, yes, the base is going to be somewhat problematic here. The connection point here is going to be the same as the MS mode. You're just going to be taking this gray part here and reversing the direction for the MA. And it goes up at a very strange angle, so it's going to be going right into the front. This is the kind of thing where generally you'd want it in the back, so it's going to be hidden out of the way. Instead, this time I think you're going to be spending as much time looking at the actual gray base there with all that awkward machinery as you are actually looking at the MS, and that's something that could have been designed in a different way with perhaps an attachment piece or something that would have plugged it in more normally in the back, the same way as we're used to with most transforming Gundams. So to stability, well, so far this guy is going to be doing a pretty good job. You'll notice that this part is going to go moving on you, but if you hold it somewhere else, it's going to actually do a decent job. If you even want to hold it here, usually if you try to pinch something when they're on these pivot mechanisms, that won't work, but because of those gray shoulder replacements, they actually stay in there pretty well. So here's a top view. As you can see, those yellow seals fairly prominent. Even that pink one there on the back, they're going to be standing out. If you look at it from the side, you've already seen that, but from underneath, what about that? If you were looking at, let's say, Shin Asuka, gets to see that fly over him and his sister, probably not a happy sight, but the colors are going to be looking pretty good, and though it is obviously legs, for whatever reason, they seem to fold up nicely enough, and those don't clearly look like feet because of their unusual claw design. So I think from most of the angles that you'd look at him from, he's going to be looking okay. From the front, what do you think of that when you've got the nose cone and the head on display? Yay or nay? That's why I'd love to hear your thoughts. So it's a little bit fun with this guy just to sort of go back and reflect the mid-80s, well, in the early 80s, Diaclone and Microman and things like that. Sweeping Japan, all sorts of ideas, and kids everywhere, of course, were going to be buying into it, whether it was an American Transformers cartoon or wherever you first see it, Robotech or the like. Anytime you get to see a robot, which is inherently cool, transform into a weapon of war or a vehicle or a gun or even a radio cassette player, who isn't going to love that? So it's the kind of thing where Bandai, when they were designing these things, you know they have that kind of thing in mind. If you like it in robot mode, why not like it even more when it's transformed? It is sort of interesting, though, that despite their big attempt in the next generation for Zeta, that they never did quite follow it up to its full extent, while at the same time, they didn't throw it out completely, as it's been popping up time and time again. In all the series, usually you'll get 2 or 3 units in each show that are going to be still carrying on the tradition. Anyway, everybody, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Messala's transformation and how it looks in both modes, and of course stick around for the verdict, where I won't be talking Diaclone, but instead just back to the actual kit itself. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stick around for lots more, and as always, thanks for watching. Bye. This would be a pretty cool Super Robot Wars when you think about it.